This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. I would like to talk or offer some reflections of my own about New Zealand politics, which is something that I'm less and less interested in because I usually follow the bigger picture. But what's prompted me to get my thoughts together is two things. The first thing is the new phenomenon of the New Zealand Public Party and Billy Te Kahika that is making waves on social media, at least. Judging from what I can see, if the election was decided by Facebook, Billy might well be our next Prime Minister, but of course it's not. The other thing is a deep scandal within the opposition National Party, which involves the leak of personal information of COVID-19 patients and the resignation of the new leader, Todd Muller, after just 2 months as leader, only for him to reappear on the government's front benches under the new leader, Judith Crusher Collins. So all of this happens against the backdrop of a supposed pandemic, weeks after we came out of 6 weeks of lockdown, and the suspicion that this is going to lead to another, even more draconian lockdown as early as August. So I have a pretty good memory of things, how they used to be in this country, politically, economically, having experienced the Muldoon governments in the 70s and early 80s when I was in my 20s, and even working in what used to be the Trade and Industry Department, which afforded me a first-hand look at the neoliberal revolution under Roger Douglas and Richard Prebble in 1984. So I've seen a lot of politics in the intervening years, including a decade or so in the Green Party, which I left several years ago when I realised the direction that they were taking. I can say that I've not seen anything like what I'm seeing now in my whole life. People tend to think in tribes and in dualistic ways. We grow to dislike what a government is doing, so the natural response is to go and vote for the other side. It's time for a change. How many times have we heard that before? New Zealanders, to this very day, seem to me to harbour a naive trust in the electoral process and to believe that a new political party will solve all our problems. I mean, how many times do you need to be betrayed to come to some sort of a realisation? But what happens when things get so corrupted that, in my view, there's not a single party in Parliament that can be trusted to represent the interests of the people? I'm disappointed by the commentary of political pundits who tend to view things as normal when they are anything but. Heaven forbid that we should acknowledge the bigger picture. We tend to look at things in a very insular and local way, with a naive belief that if enough people get behind something, we're going to be free to make sweeping changes without sanctions and interventions by bigger fish, not least our colleagues in the Five Eyes. Everything has a simple answer, even if a solution is nowhere to be seen. Either, like most people, we believe everything we are told by politicians and media pundits, or we fall into conspiracy theory and divide people arbitrarily into good and evil. Conspiracy theories are fine and can shed a lot of light on what goes on behind the scenes, but like everything, there are good, well thought out theories, and there are bad ones, which use one assumption as the basis for further assumptions. Myself, I generally prefer institutional analysis, although that comes with a greater and greater realization that there is considerable conspiracy behind the scenes. I don't think that we can look to any salvation from politicians. Mostly they're in it for themselves, whether it be ego or pecuniary interest, straight out corruption. A lot of people do come into politics with good intentions. They're not evil people. However, the closer you come to the centre of power, the more compromises have to be made. And when people come into power, whoever they are, find that they're unable to introduce the changes they want because we are, and always have been, as a small country, subject to bigger fish who determine what we can and cannot do. Perhaps they find out that New Zealand has been signed up to an international agreement by a previous government which prevents them from acting in an independent or sovereign manner, which is why things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership are so dangerous. They learn that we cannot do certain things because of the Five Eyes, or because of the United States, or because of China. Governments find that they are enthralled to the United Nations or the World Health Organization. It does not help when the politicians are ideologically wedded to globalised politics, and when prime ministers cut their teeth working for Tony Blair or make their fortunes by betting against the New Zealand dollar in a speculative attack. The first big shock to New Zealand that I remember, after Britain essentially abandoned us after joining the European Common Market, was the Rogernomics revolution of the 80s, and then the 9/11 attacks in the United States and what followed. Nothing has ever been the same since 9/11, 2001. So looking back, to some extent, the Helen Clark government tried to maintain some independence in foreign policy, while at the same time following a neoliberal economic model. However, it was 9 years of government under John Key that changed New Zealand fundamentally into the corrupt, democratically challenged country it is now. I was one of many that cheered when the present government came into power and National was defeated. However, hope quickly turned into disappointment after the Christchurch mosque attacks in March last year. Were used to bring in further anti-democratic changes, and perhaps they were used by overseas parties to bring New Zealand into line with others' agendas. We don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me in the very least. This has been greatly accelerated with the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns after ignoring all the signs and waiting for the WHO mandate. So I suspect it's the same thing all over again that I was just talking about. Outsiders trying to change the way in which we operate through false flags and pandemics, or plandemics maybe. The rhetoric across the board that the government took early and tough action to beat the virus, and that our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern did so well, is just plain false in my mind. I suspect that the success of the government has more to do with luck and the nature of the virus itself than with the good, well thought out policy. So the conclusion that I've come to is that there are two aspects to this. There is politics, as we're used to, and this is local to us, it's New Zealand. And I would have to say that at that level, Judith Collins is definitely the bigger danger politically. However, there's also the bigger picture that the vast majority of people seem to ignore. Whoever is in power, the results are essentially the same for the reasons I've just given. Very dangerous changes are coming to this country in the form of economic depression and a lockdown that, it seems to me, is never going to end, and is going to come with an unprecedented attack on our liberties. So, deciding who you're going to vote for seems to be a choice, I'm exaggerating slightly here for effect, between fascism with a fist inside a velvet glove, that's Jacinta, or fascism with an iron fist, which is Judith. Ultimately, the results are the same. So in the circumstances we see today, I'm highly sceptical about the parliamentary process and finding answers and salvations there. I find myself fascinated by and find myself attracted to the message of Billy Te Kahika and the New Zealand Public Party that he has set up and has been trying to get registered for the election in 2 months' time. What makes him different in my mind is that he is open and, it seems to me, honest. Not the least in this is that everything he says is open and underpinned by a strong Christian-based moral compass. And he's no demagogue, and he's certainly not a Brian Tamaki. So although I do not intend to get further involved other than through my pen, I wish him well. It provides a context in which people can discuss the very real dangers to our democracy and hopefully provide a platform under which people can come together to start to offer resistance to what is already happening and what is in the wings. At some stage, people have to step away from their computers, phones and devices and come together to say that they do not intend to obey laws and regulations that are going to lead us all into servitude. They need to disabuse themselves of the illusion of the possibility of change through the ballot box. As they say, if change came through the ballot box, voting would be illegal. And we need to act without a view to the result. We can never determine what the results of our actions is going to be. I'm certainly not talking here about revolution. We know what the outcome of revolutionary change usually is. Instead, I'm talking here about the withdrawal of consent. I'm going to maintain my self-respect, and I am not going to obey. We live in interesting times, and we all know what that means in the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. I'm deeply influenced by what someone told me 30 years ago. Optimism is the absence of realism, and I prefer realism over ideals and hope, especially in what I believe to be the final days.